In a desolate, boundless border region of Anatolia, amidst ruins battered by the wind, a silent nomad waited. He had neither a golden crown nor a stone-walled palace. He carried only a destiny written in blood. This was Osman Gazi. But what could have happened to such a magnificent power?
10. This rule Osman Gazi learned from the rocks. The Saud and Domanich region was a harsh landscape that crushed people and forced them to submit to its own rules. Sharp rocks, freezing winter winds, and narrow valleys were like a natural monument that instantly swallowed the weak. This region was an arena where only the strong could survive, a place where nature showed no mercy. Osman Gazi's character was forged within these harsh rocks and relentless storms. These lands were a narrow passage squeezed between the collapsed Seljuk Empire and the dying Byzantine Empire. Nomads struggling to breathe amid the wreckage of two colossal powers lived under a constant threat of annihilation. Geography left them no place to take refuge. They would either take root in these harsh lands or vanish into the darkness of history. Nature's cruel determinism pushed Osman Gazi toward ruthless pragmatism. There was no room for doubt in his decisions, because nature did not forgive those who doubted. He incorporated the coldness of the mountains and the silence of the valleys into his strategy. The art of ambush, hit-and-run tactics, and the strategy of wearing down the enemy were the rules of war that nature itself had taught him. He managed to harness nature's destructive power in his own sword. He moved like the wind and stood as unshakable as the mountains. He united the small tribes around him under this survival instinct and transformed them into a killing machine. However, these wild mountains that protected them would soon demand the blood of their own children.
9. Osman Gazi's secret network from the market to the dergah. While swords clashed on Anatolian soil, a much darker and quieter battle was being fought underground. Sheikh Edebali was not merely a religious figure. He was the leader of the Ahis organization, which controlled all trade routes, merchants, and intelligence. This secret organization had infiltrated the capillaries of towns and cities, establishing a vast network of power that no one could see. Osman Gazi realized very early on that the sword alone was not enough. By marrying Edebali's daughter, he combined the brute force of the sword with this silent intelligence and economic network. He was now not only a warrior, but also the protector of this immense structure operating in the shadows. The Ahis became his eyes and ears. Everyone from the bakers inside the Byzantine castles to the merchants in the market was part of this secret brotherhood. Months before Osman Gazi approached a castle with his army, the Ahis would begin to undermine the castle's economy and morale from within. The gates were often opened not by battering rams, but by invisible hands reaching in from within. This mysterious alliance transformed a nomadic chieftain into a regional power overnight. This system, where information, money, and faith converged, created an invincible war machine. However, every power built in the shadows carries the risk of dragging its master into darkness when the time comes.
8. Osman Gazi's mysterious alliance with the enemy. Surviving on the borderlands sometimes requires sitting down at the table with your greatest enemy. Kursey Mihal, the ruler of Harmankaya, was a loyal and noble commander of the Byzantine Empire. However, instead of killing him on the battlefield, Osman Gazi managed to draw him to his side through psychological warfare. This was a mind game far more dangerous than the sword. Kursey Mihal's betrayal of his own empire and his decision to side with Osman Gazi struck deep fear into the hearts of all the Christian lords in the region. Osman Gazi had captured his enemy's mind. Mihal laid not only his castle, but also all of Byzantium's strategic secrets, military tactics, and weak points at Osman Gazi's feet. This alliance transformed Osman Gazi's army from a mere nomadic horde. The Byzantines' 1,000 years of engineering knowledge, siege techniques, and battle formations flowed directly into Osman Gazi's headquarters. Kursey Mihal was presenting the recipe for the destruction of the empire he once served to his new master. The strategy of conquering the enemy from within created an invincible stance around Osman Gazi. This relationship of mutual interest, established under the mask of friendship, was a harbinger of a great collapse that would extend beyond borders. However, empires built on betrayal inevitably have to face betrayal within themselves.
7. The First Border Drawn with Uncle's Blood by Osman Gazi. The birth of a state often requires the death of innocence. As borders expanded, a more dangerous problem than external enemies emerged: internal power struggles. Osman Gazi's uncle, Dündar Bey, defended old traditions, opposed his nephew's aggressive conquests, and quietly sought to establish his own authority. Conflict was inevitable. Two authorities could not coexist under one tent. In the midst of a heated argument, Osman Gazi completely erased human emotions such as mercy and blood ties from his mind. He calmly drew his bow, aimed the arrow at his uncle's chest, and released his fingers. When Dündar Bey's body fell to the ground, the first political execution in Ottoman history had taken place. This act was not merely the death of a man, but the birth of the ruthless face of the state. That moment was engraved in history as an absolute law. Family ties meant nothing in the face of the state's survival. Osman Gazi secured his ultimate supremacy by spilling his uncle's blood. Mercy died, replaced by the cold, emotionless machinery of the state. Borders were now drawn not with the blood of enemies, but with the blood of family. This first noble blood seeping into the earth initiated a dark cycle of murder that would last for many years.
6. Osman Gazi's 8-hour silent oath. Great empires are built not on battlefields, but in the trials of will within dark rooms. That night, while staying as a guest in the dervish's humble home, Osman Gazi became transfixed by a leather-bound book hanging on the wall of the room. It was the Holy Quran, the Word of God. At that moment, he had to make a definitive choice between the comfort of the body and the surrender of the soul. He considered lying down on the bed in a room containing the holy book and stretching out his legs to be the greatest insult to his faith. He moved to the center of the room, clasped his hands on his stomach, and turned his body into stone. As the cold of the night penetrated his bones, he waited quietly, his eyes never leaving the book. For exactly 8 hours, until the sun rose above the horizon and showed its first rays, he did not move an inch from his spot. The numbness in his legs clashed with the feeling of sleep in his mind. This superhuman display of willpower, which transcended the limits of his body, proved that he was not just a soldier, but a man of conviction. After 8 hours, legend has it that a divine voice spoke to him. In return for his absolute reverence for the word, he received the promise that his lineage would rule the world. He built the spiritual foundation of a colossal power in that dark room. However, this pure faith, which melted iron chains, would eventually rust under the weight of absolute power. 5.
Osman Gazi's mystical arms reaching down to his knees. Figures who shake the world often bear unusual traces of nature on their bodies. Osman Gazi's appearance possessed a mysterious grandeur that set him apart from ordinary soldiers and struck fear into the hearts of those who saw him. He had a chest as hard and broad as a rock carved by the wind. But the real mystery lay in his arms. Records state that when Osman Gazi stood upright, his arms reached down to his knees. This physical difference gave him a deadly reach on the battlefield, while among the people it took on a deep mythological meaning. In ancient Eastern beliefs, long arms were a symbol of world domination, absolute power, and justice that reached everywhere. This physical anomaly was perceived as an immense protective shield for his friends and an inescapable death grip for his enemies. Those arms seemed designed by nature not just to wield a sword, but to strangle an entire geography. This disproportionate power in his body transformed him into a legendary being. This physical majesty over ordinary people made his authority unquestionable. This unique man proclaimed with his very stance that he would be unlike anyone else in his decisions. No matter how extraordinary, flesh and bone are ultimately doomed to surrender to the silence of the earth.
4. The divine map written on Osman Gazi's chest. Power is first sown in the mind and then becomes reality. Osman Gazi's mind transcended time and space in that silent, soundless sleep at Sheikh Edebali's dervish lodge. On the rough bed where he slept, a cosmic vision of a magnitude beyond the comprehension of an ordinary person assaulted his mind. In his dream, a perfect, bright full moon rose from Sheikh Edebali's chest. The moon slowly glided through the room, entered Osman Gazi's own chest, and was sealed into his body. At that moment, a huge plane tree began to sprout from his belly. The tree grew so fast and with such terrifying power that its branches pierced the sky and its leaves covered 3 continents. From the tree's enormous roots, the Tigris, Euphrates, Nile, and Danube rivers began to flow down to the earth in cascades. Cities were being built in the geography nourished by these rivers, and mountains and valleys were merging under the ultimate shadow of this single tree. The borders of the future empire were drawn in his mind in a single night by divine decree. When he awoke drenched in sweat, he was shaken by the weight of the burden upon him. With Edebali interpreting this dream as a sign of world domination, Osman Gazi's life purpose completely changed. He was the first root of this colossal tree. However, every colossal tree that pierces the heavens must eventually rot from its roots and fall.
3. Osman Gazi's Silver Dome Prophecy. Years of bloody wars and a lifetime spent on horseback finally began to take their toll on his invincible body. When illness took hold of Osman Gazi's bones, his hands, no longer able to wield a sword, could only gaze at the horizon. From the slope of a mountain, he watched the walls of Bursa, which had remained unconquered and which he had been waiting to fall for years. The lead-covered dome of the Saint Elie monastery inside the walls glistened like a silver shield under the sun. Weakened by illness, he turned to those around him and pointed to the shining structure. "Bury me in that silver dome," he said, uttering his final, mysterious will.
The city had not yet been conquered, the walls were strong, and Byzantine soldiers stood guard. Yet even as he awaited death, Osman Gazi proclaimed the certainty of the approaching conquest like a prophet. This will was not merely a burial order, but an absolute goal of victory etched into his soldiers' minds. Even as he departed from this world, he was executing his final military maneuver. When Bursa fell, his soldiers carried his decaying body to the shining dome, exactly where he had ordered. Even after his death, he continued to lie at the heart of the city he had conquered. But even the brightest silver cannot escape tarnishing in the eternal silence of the tomb.
2. The secret found in Osman Gazi's tent, the salt shaker. The man who shook the world left behind a deep silence after his last breath, following the terrifying army he had created. His commanders and heirs were shocked when they entered their leader's tent to record his personal belongings. Everyone expected precious stones, chests full of gold and silk fabrics. However, the interior of the tent was filled with terrifying emptiness. The personal belongings left behind by the man who founded a great empire consisted only of battle-worn armor, a sword that had lost its sharpness, a wooden spoon holder, and a simple salt shaker. He owned nothing more than a handful of soil. This shocking poverty was proof of his unwavering commitment to the Ahis tradition. He had not claimed the boundless lands he conquered as his own property, but had placed every inch of them at the service of the cause he had built. This absolute contempt for worldly possessions was his greatest strength. He had rejected pride and chosen the harsh simplicity of service. The simple wooden salt shaker and sword left behind expressed the state's original pure intentions, its untainted structure. These objects were like a silent slap in the face of the splendor of the palaces. This humble salt was the last pure thing left before the impending poisoning by great power.
1. Osman Gazi's silent curse falling upon the ruins. As that magnificent structure was built, racing from one success to another, it also began to feed the arrogance within. Man's desire for absolute power slowly undermined the laws of nature and the purity of the first day. What began as a dervish-like journey with salt shakers and swords gave way to colossal palaces, gold-embroidered thrones, and endless betrayals. Decay did not come overnight. It crept in quietly, unnoticed, eating away at the bones. The intoxication of great victories drowned out the footsteps of the approaching disaster. When the scales of justice were thrown off balance, when merit gave way to loyalty and palace intrigue, that mighty oak tree began to wither from within. The waters of the 4 rivers dried up, and the tree's enormous shadow shrank and began to fade. Nature waited patiently to reclaim what was hers. The disaster collapsed under the weight of internal corruption rather than noisy wars. Human pride was crushed under the empire it had created. Those magnificent cities were shattered by the merciless wheel of time. Mountains and valleys swallowed the stone buildings upon them, returning to their former wild state. That silent destruction, the fate of every great civilization, also enveloped the Ottoman roots. Today, only crumbling stones and moss-covered ruins remain on the land where that first dream was seen. Time buried all humanity's ambitions in the earth. Everything returns to the earth. Now the wind whispers a forgotten name in these empty ruins. What do you think this 8-hour watch was the price of? I await your comments.